This trade happened 2 years ago in the wake of the Seattle Kraken expansion draft. It was a move made by Kyle Dubas and the Toronto Maple Leafs in order to, do I want to say protect their assets, quote unquote? Because in a way that's kind of what they did, but at the same time they ended up losing out on a player that was a part of their team that ended up being very good. Yeah, we'll get into it more as the video goes along. Let's talk today about a trade made between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Toronto Maple Leafs on July 17th, 2021. The Jared McCann trade. Because 2 years later, in 2023, the trade details are finally confirmed. They're solidified. They're in stone. And in order to really acknowledge what happened with this trade, you have to go over the context here. Of course, the main focus of this video and the reason you clicked on it is because we're talking about Jared McCann, a player who doesn't play for Pittsburgh nor Toronto. He's on the Seattle Kraken, and as a 27-year-old, 6'1", 185-pound left-handed center-left winger, he's signed to the end of 2027, making $5 million a year. Now, the contract is pretty decent. It's like in the average territory of what NHL players usually make, but when it comes to the cost per dollar, you could debate that Jared McCann is playing well above his pay grade, as in the most recent season of play, he had 70 points and 40 goals in 79 games played. He also had himself a 50-point year in 74 games in his first season with the Kraken. So, for all intents and purposes, Jared McCann is a solidified top 6 borderline elite NHL player, making a fraction of the cost. If you can assume that McCann is going to be able to continually get 30 goals per season, boast up maybe 60-70 points every year, then $5 million is a pretty good dollar amount, if I do say so myself. But as we had noted, Jared McCann was formerly a Toronto Maple Leaf, and the reason this entire thing is so interesting is because he wasn't ever a Leaf on the ice. He was only a Leaf in spirit for a fraction of time. As in this entire period, you had teams scrambling about, trying to fix their rosters and make themselves prepared for the draft, the Seattle Kraken draft. Everybody knows that when Vegas entered the league in 2017, they kind of screwed over the entire league because teams didn't take them seriously. You had teams giving Vegas free players alongside of other players. Hey, if you take Riley Smith, we'll give you Jonathan Marchessault for free, I tell ya. We'll give you a first-round pick to take our player. That's a depth guy with us, but will actually thrive under a new team with you. Teams were getting really scared, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't set Seattle up to be a powerhouse and make the Stanley Cup gosh darn finals in their first year. So for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Jared McCann, he wasn't really that great of a player as he is in Seattle back with them. He had 35 points in 66 games played, and then admittedly had a really good season in 2020-2021, 32 points, 43 games. Now, he wasn't the top-of-the-line player like he is in Seattle, but Jared McCann just unfortunately was the odd man out. And when it came to the Pittsburgh Penguins, everybody sort of knew that when they were doing the mocks and all the Seattle Kraken expansion stuff in their projections, Jared McCann was probably gonna be the guy that would be sent over. And the Penguins knew this, so what they did was they traded Jared McCann over to the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for one Philip Hollander, as well as a 2023 7th-round pick. Now, the pick was eventually used. It was used in the 2023 draft, as we had said, but Jared McCann was eventually a Toronto Maple Leaf, and a lot of Leafs fans were kind of interested in this idea that, hey, they got this guy, he is supposed to be a budding middle-to-top 6 forward, he needs a contract in 2022, but this is a player that could legitimately be effective if he continues down the path of growth he has been on. He was bounced around from Vancouver to Florida to Pittsburgh, but he really started to find his stride only recently. But the Toronto Maple Leafs had other plans, because when they acquired McCann, you could tell that the acquisition wasn't necessarily because they were getting a guy that they wanted to use, but more so, they wanted to get this player in order to entice the Kraken to take him rather than Alex Kerfoot. And there was an entire thing with the expansion draft. Oh, would it be Kerfoot? Would it be McCann? There was a video leaked of Kevin Weeks in the Seattle I don't know what it's called, like the fish market? Yeah, the market, that's what it is, the public market. And they had a video leaked of them saying that they drafted Alex Kerfoot from the Maple Leafs, thus leaving McCann in Toronto. But, as we all kind of know, Seattle ended up taking McCann, Alex Kerfoot stuck around in Toronto, and the philosophy back then was that the Toronto Maple Leafs essentially paid a price of Philip Hallander and the 7th round pick to keep Kerfoot on the team. Now, whether or not you could say that's a smart move, whatever, that's kind of how it transpired. They got this guy in order for Seattle to take him, and that's exactly what happened. Now, as we had said, Jared McCann is a solid top 6, maybe even first-line NHL player. 70 points, 40 goals, you can't go wrong with that. And the Toronto Maple Leafs are stuck with a guy in Kerfoot who is no longer in Toronto. He signed a contract with the Arizona Coyotes after this previous offseason, so there you go. That's the bet paid off. Let's go over to the return that the Pittsburgh Penguins received in this McCann trade, starting out with Philip Hallander. It's interesting because Hallander is a 2000-born, 6'1", 196-pound, left-handed left-wing center, 23 years old, initially drafted by Pittsburgh in 2018. This guy was sent over to Toronto in the Kasperi-Kapanen trade. No, I'm not talking about the Phil Kessel trade, the second Kasperi-Kapanen trade from Toronto to Pittsburgh. Hallander was an original Penguins prospect that was sent over to Toronto in the Kasperi-Kapanen trade and was eventually sent back to Pittsburgh in the Jared McCann trade. He played a bunch of games in the AHL, played a very small amount of games in the NHL, but after this season, he actually signed a 5-year deal with Timrå IK in the SHL, so he's going to be going over there till 2028. Yeah, the Penguins essentially lost out on this guy. Unfortunate. And it really is unfortunate because he was a pretty good AHL player. 33 points, 43 games played for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins last year. Definitely not bad. So really, the last remnants of this trade that still exists with either of these teams is that 7th round pick from Toronto that was used by Pittsburgh this previous draft. 217th overall, they used it to select Emil Järventie, who is an 18-year-old forward, 5'10", 168 pounds, left-handed guy out of the Saipa team in the Liga. Take a look at this. His most recent season saw him put up 1 goal in 15 games. Not great, but he also played for Kuvi in the Mestis, so the second-tier Finnish league, had 7 points in 19 games over there. Also was pretty good for Team Finland at the U18s. The scouting report for Järventie reads this: he's a winger who is relatively quick, anticipates openings off the rush, and has a mix of handling, shooting, and even some playmaking skills. His offense revolves around the rush, particularly in odd-man situations. So, for Järventie, this is an intriguing prospect taken by the Penguins in the 7th round. With a 7th round pick, you can take a swing on pretty much whoever you want, and the Penguins feel that Järventie is the appropriate choice here. He's going to be bouncing up and down between different Finnish leagues, most likely for the next few years in his career, but at the end of the day, this is the one remaining piece on either the Penguins or the Leafs that still represents that trade tree involving Jared McCann, who was sent over to Toronto 2 years ago. He's a Seattle Kraken stud now. The Maple Leafs lost out on Kerfoot. You could say 2-3 years later that everything wasn't really worth it, but at the end of the day, this is how the dominoes end up falling. So if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Jared McCann trade 2 years later? How do you feel about the assets you gave up to keep Kerfoot? How do you feel about the idea that you had McCann on your team, but you let him go? This was a guy that is now a stud, and if you had McCann playing with Matthews and Marner and whoever, I think he would probably excel pretty well, more so than Alex Kerfoot ever did. But that's just kind of with hindsight, so I don't know if it's all too fair to say that. Do you think it's really fair? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, if you're a Penguins fan, how do you feel about the departure of Philip Hallander from your organization? 5-year deal with the Timrå IK in the SHL? That is nuts. He just straight up left your team. How do you feel about Järventie now being in your system? And what are your thoughts on y'all losing out on McCann too, because he was essentially gonna be on his way out anyway in the Seattle draft. You just ended up getting some extra assets to send him away instead. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this entire Jared McCann trade. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.